get ready to dive deep, because we're heading back to the 1700s this time. 18th century Britain. It's like powdered wigs, empires, and revolutions. You've been exploring it, right? So let's unpack this whole thing.
It's a pivotal century, that's for sure. Britain's stepping onto the world stage, becoming, well, a global superpower. But that climb to the top, it wasn't always, a smooth ride.
Definitely not all tea parties and crumpets, I imagine. My notes, though, they talk about insane economic growth. What was fueling that engine?
Oh, it's more than just tea parties. Picture this industry's exploding. Shipbuilding, textiles, cotton production, it skyrocketed. Almost 800% increase during the 18th century alone. And it's not just what they're producing, it's where they're sending it. Global trade networks, a navy that's basically ruling the waves.
Yeah.
All that stuff meant serious wealth. And influence, of course.
800%. Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. But all this wealth, right? It wasn't exactly trickling down to everyone, was it?
That's the tricky part about progress, isn't it? There are always, winners and, those who get left behind. You've got your elites. Yeah, they're sipping tea, living the good life. But for the working class, the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, it's a mixed bag. Machines are replacing skilled workers, jobs are disappearing, and the factory conditions, grueling doesn't even cover it. Not exactly the image that comes to mind when you think of 18th century Britain, right?
Right. Progress rarely comes without a cost, I guess. But this newfound economic power, all this industry, it must have had impact on the whole political scene, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. We see the cabinet system kind of taking shape. We're talking Robert Walpole, considered by many to be Britain's first prime minister. That's a seismic shift in power. All the backroom deals, the political maneuvering, it's fascinating.
Like a real-life house of cards, but with better costumes. And speaking of power struggles, what about this king versus parliament thing? That sounds juicy.
Ooh, that was brewing the entire century. See, the idea of a limited monarchy, it was gaining traction. But King George III, he wasn't about to just be a figurehead. He wanted more control, which predictably led to some pretty epic showdowns with Parliament.
A king who actually wants to rule. Imagine that.
Yeah.
But this tension wasn't just confined to the halls of power, was it? My notes mention a name, John Wilkes. He sounds like quite a character.
John Wilkes, he's a key figure. Passionate advocate for free speech, individual rights, the whole shebang. He even ended up in prison for his beliefs. This whole thing, the Wilkes affair, it's what they call it, it showed everyone that public opinion, it mattered. It forced the government to listen to the people, and that, my friend, was huge.
Talk about a win for the little guy.
Yeah.
But these rumblings of change, they weren't limited to Britain itself, right? We got to talk about America.
Yes, across the pond. Things were heating up in the colonies. The relationship between Britain and America, let's just say it was getting a little strained. And the main sticking point, taxes, of course. Those colonists, they weren't too keen on forking over their hard-earned cash without some say in the matter. Taxation without representation and all that.
And as they say, the rest is history.
History indeed, the American Revolution. And while, yes, it was about taxes on the surface, remember it ran much deeper than that. It was about the very essence of self-governance, about having a voice in your own destiny. Britain losing the colonies, that was a huge blow. Politically, obviously, but also in terms of their whole, image.
Makes you wonder, if things had been handled a bit differently, a bit more listening, a bit less taxing, maybe things could have gone another way. But hey, hindsight is 20/20, right?
Hindsight is definitely 20/20. But it goes to show, even back then, listening to the people you govern. Pretty important, wouldn't you say?
Couldn't agree more. Still relevant today, that's for sure. But the 18th century wasn't just about America, was it? I see some unrest brewing a bit closer to home. Ireland and Scotland, they were making some noise too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Let's start with Ireland. Under British rule, but facing some serious discrimination, particularly against Catholics. Imagine the resentment, the feeling of being treated like a second-class citizen in your own land. That inevitably leads to unrest, calls for change.
And then there's Scotland. They had their own issues with the crown, didn't they?
They did indeed. The Jacobite rebellions, these were all about trying to get the Stuarts back on the throne. Shows you the depth of feeling, the desire for, a different ruler, maybe even full-on independence. Those uprisings, they ultimately failed, but they're incredibly telling about the time. Deep divisions, strong desires for change.
Wow. It's like the 18th century in Britain was just one giant powder keg waiting to explode. It really does make you think, doesn't it? If you could go back, where would you even start? Would you be a weaver in those new factories, struggling to make ends meet? Or maybe you'd be out there with John Wilkes, fighting for your right to speak your mind. Or maybe you'd be plotting a revolution, just like those colonists across the sea.
This century, it's just full of these what-if moments, but that's what makes it so fascinating to study, don't you think?
Absolutely. It might have been a while ago, but there are echoes of 18th century Britain everywhere you look today.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that history, well, it's not just dates and names in a textbook, it's the story of us, you know?
It really is. And the more we understand where we come from, the better equipped we are to, well, navigate where we're going.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's 18th century Britain for you. A century of change, upheaval, and honestly, a healthy dose of drama.